On the night I was called useless in front of the entire family. I smiled through the sting. The laughter that followed cut deeper than any knife could. What they didn't know was that I had built a fortune in silence, $57 million they had lived off without even realizing. Every credit card payment, every bailout, every emergency loan had come from my accounts. By the time they reached for more, I was already ready to shut every door in their faces. This Thanksgiving would be the last time they'd feast on my generosity. My name is Madeline Rowe, though everyone calls me Maddie. At 34, I've learned that family gatherings are performances where everyone plays their assigned roles. Mine, apparently, was the disappointment. The wooden church in our Columbus suburb looked postcard perfect that Thanksgiving evening, its stained glass windows glowing amber against the November frost. Inside our family home next door, the dining room buzzed with conversation and clinking silverware. 23 relatives had gathered around the extended mahogany table that my stepfather Victor insisted on displaying like a trophy. I sat in my usual spot third from the end, where the important conversations barely reached. Victor held court at the head, his silver hair gleaming under the chandelier as he carved the turkey with surgical precision. My mother sat to his right, her nervous smile frozen in place as it had been for the past 20 years since she married him. "So, Maddie," Victor's voice boomed across the table, silencing the chatter. "Still doing that? What is it again?" "Data entry, financial analysis," I corrected quietly. "At Northbridge Capital." He snorted, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times before. "Right, analysis." He made air quotes with his knife still in hand. "Fancy word for pushing numbers around a screen." My half-brother Marcus, Victor's golden child, chuckled from across the table. "At least she has a job now. Dad, remember when she was waiting tables? And selling junk online," added my stepsister Catherine, examining her manicured nails. "What was it?" "Used books, vintage clothing," I said. But my voice was drowned out by their laughter. Victor set down the carving knife with deliberate force. "You know what the problem is? Some people are builders, and some people are, well," his eyes found mine, cold and dismissive. "Useless. Dead weight. They go through life expecting others to carry them." The word hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Useless. My mother's fork trembled against her plate, but she said nothing. She never did. "That's harsh, Victor," Aunt Patricia murmured, but even she avoided my gaze. "Harsh. I'm being honest. Look at Marcus' Harvard MBA, running 3 franchises. Catherine launched her boutique at 25. Even little Jamie here," he gestured to my youngest stepbrother, "made partner at his firm last month. And then there's Maddie, 34 years old, renting some shoebox apartment downtown, probably can't even afford to contribute to this meal." My cousin Derek laughed, wine sloshing in his glass. "At least Victor raised his kids right. Some people just can't be helped." "I guess." They didn't know about the penthouse I actually owned in that shoebox building. They didn't know about the portfolio worth $57 million, built from careful investments in tech startups and commercial real estate. They didn't know that the mortgage on this very house had my name on the guarantee, hidden behind an LLC. They didn't know that their feast, their comfort, their entire lifestyle was subsidized by the useless one at the table. I lifted my wine glass of vintage Bordeaux I'd brought, but Victor claimed he'd selected and took a small sip. The crystal was delicate between my fingers, so easy to shatter. "You're right, Victor," I said, my voice steady as granite. "Some people are builders." He preened, missing the edge in my tone entirely. "Maddie, maybe you should consider moving back home," Catherine suggested with false sweetness. "Save some money. I'm sure Daddy wouldn't mind converting the garage." The garage. Marcus nearly choked on his turkey. "That's generous. I was thinking the basement." The laughter erupted again, cruel and sharp. My mother finally looked at me, and for a split second, I thought I saw regret in her eyes. But then she looked away, reaching for Victor's hand in a show of unity that made my stomach turn. I stood up slowly, placing my napkin beside my barely touched plate. "Leaving already," Victor called out. Can't handle a little family honesty." I paused at the doorway, memorizing the scene, the golden turkey, the flickering candles, the smug faces of people who had no idea their world was about to crumble. "Just getting some air," I said. "Enjoy your dinner." As I walked through the hallway lined with family photos, none of which included me, I pulled out my phone. The banking app opened with my thumbprint, revealing numbers that would make everyone in that room lose their minds. But they'd learn soon enough. Tonight was the last time Victor Rowe would ever call me useless. Standing on the frost-covered porch, I watched my breath form clouds in the November air while memories flooded back like water through a broken dam. The word useless wasn't new. Victor had branded me with it when I was 14, the day my mother introduced him as my new father. "This is Maddie," she'd said, her hand on my shoulder. "She's very bright." Victor had looked me up and down like I was livestock at auction. "Bright doesn't pay bills. My kids know the value of hard work." That was my introduction to the man who would spend the next 20 years trying to break me. When I was 16, I asked to join the family ski trip to Aspen. Victor laughed, actually laughed, and said, "You think money grows on trees. Maybe if you contributed something to this family instead of just taking up space." Marcus and Catherine went. I stayed home, watching their Instagram posts while working a double shift at McDonald's. College was my supposed escape, but even that came with strings. Victor made it clear that every penny toward my state school tuition was an act of charity. "My kids earned their way into good schools," he'd announce at every opportunity. "Some people just aren't Harvard material." Why, meanwhile, I worked 3 jobs waiting tables at a diner until 2 in the morning, stocking shelves at Target on weekends, and selling vintage clothes I'd hunt for at thrift stores on an eBay account. My mother would sometimes slip me $20 when Victor wasn't looking, her eyes full of guilt she'd never voice. "Just until you get on your feet," she'd whisper, as if getting on my feet was the problem and not the boot on my neck. The Christmas of my junior year was when I learned my real place in the family hierarchy. I'd saved for months to buy decent gifts for everyone, a silk scarf for my mother, a leather wallet for Victor, premium headphones for Marcus. On Christmas morning, I watched them open elaborate presents from each other while my gifts sat in a pile, politely acknowledged but obviously inadequate. Victor handed me an envelope. Inside was a $50 Walmart gift card and a note, "For necessities." But the moment that nearly broke me came the summer after graduation. I'd landed an entry-level analyst position at a small firm downtown. It didn't pay much, but it was a start. The family was planning a Mediterranean cruise to celebrate Marcus's MBA graduation. "I can contribute $500, I'd offered, proud that I could finally chip in. Victor had actually patted my head like I was a child. "That's sweet, Maddie, but this is a luxury cruise. Your $500 wouldn't even cover the port fees. Besides, someone needs to watch the house. You understand." "Right. Not everyone can afford the finer things." They sent me photos from Santorini, from Rome, from Monaco. I spent that week eating ramen in my studio apartment, teaching myself Python programming from YouTube videos and analyzing market trends until my eyes burned. That's when I discovered I had a gift not for being bright, as my mother had once said, but for seeing patterns others missed. The irony was that while Victor preached about hard work and building wealth, he'd inherited his money from his father's construction company. He'd never built anything himself, just maintained what was handed to him. But I was building something from nothing, line by line, trade by trade, in the shadows where nobody bothered to look. Every rejection, every dismissive laugh, every "maybe next time Maddie" became fuel. While they celebrated their conventional successes, I was learning about cryptocurrency before it was mainstream, studying biotech companies that would eventually revolutionize medicine, identifying real estate opportunities in neighborhoods they'd never deigned to visit. The last family dinner I'd attended before tonight was 3 years ago. Catherine had just opened her boutique with a $100,000 loan from Victor. "Must be nice," I'd said, genuinely trying to congratulate her. "Jealousy is so ugly. Maddie," she'd responded. "Maybe if you'd worked harder. Daddy would invest in you too. But what would he invest in your little desk job?" That night, I'd gone home to my shoebox apartment and moved another $1 million into my portfolio. The biotech startup I'd invested in had just gone public, but I said nothing. I'd learned that silence was my best weapon, and the profound underestimation of a woman they'd already written off as useless. Now, standing outside that house, listening to their laughter drift through the windows, I realized something: they hadn't just dismissed me. They'd erased me, edited me out of their success story like I was a typo. But you can't edit out the foundation when the whole house is built on it. They just didn't know it yet. The transformation didn't happen overnight. After graduation, I took that entry-level analyst position at a boutique firm downtown, $42,000 a year before taxes. Victor had laughed when he heard. "My secretary makes more than that," he'd said. But that job was my education in how money really moved through the world. I lived on rice and beans, spending 16 hours a day absorbing everything. While my colleagues went to happy hour, I studied SEC filings. While they slept, I analyzed international markets opening across the globe. My boss thought I was dedicated. The truth was, I was desperate to never feel small again. The first breakthrough came 18 months in. I'd noticed unusual activity in a small biomedical company's patents. They were developing a revolutionary diabetes monitoring system, but nobody was paying attention because their marketing was terrible. I invested my entire savings, $8,000, and watched it turn into $80,000 in 6 months when Johnson & Johnson acquired them. I told no one, not even my mother. Instead, I moved that money into 3 more investments: a telehealth platform before COVID made it essential, a sustainable packaging company before plastic bans went mainstream, and a small portfolio of rental properties in an undesirable neighborhood that I knew the city had slated for development. My lifestyle never changed. I still drove my beaten Honda Civic, still wore clothes from Target, still lived in that same studio apartment. When family members saw me, they saw what they expected: poor Maddie, struggling to make ends meet. The performance was exhausting but necessary. The real acceleration happened 3 years into my journey. The telehealth platform went public at a $3 billion valuation. My $80,000 investment, which I'd leveraged into a larger position, was suddenly worth $4 million. That same month, the rental properties I'd bought for $300,000 total were valued at $1.2 million as the neighborhood gentrified exactly as I'd predicted. But the masterpiece was CloudVault, a data security startup I'd discovered through a programming forum. The founder was brilliant, but couldn't pitch to save his life. I invested $500,000 everything I could liquidate and introduced him to 3 key contacts from my network. 2 years later, Microsoft bought CloudVault for $800 million. My stake was worth $42 million. The day that deal closed, I was sitting in my cubicle at Northbridge Capital, where I'd moved for a senior analyst position. My colleagues were discussing their mortgage stress and credit card debt while I was quietly moving millions into tax-advantaged accounts and trusts. The strangest part was how little I wanted to spend it on myself. Sure, I bought the penthouse in the building where I'd been renting paid cash, kept renting the studio as a decoy. I had a small collection of art nobody knew about, a wine cellar I never showed anyone, and a portfolio that generated more passive income in a month than Victor's precious construction company made in a year. But the money wasn't about luxury. It was about power. The power to never be excluded again. The power to never beg for scraps at someone else's table. I incorporated everything under anonymous LLCs and trusts. Rowe Holdings, Madeline Investments, Mr. Capital. The paperwork was boring, but it was armor. When I quietly paid off my mother's credit cards through an anonymous benefactor, she never suspected. When I covered Marcus's gambling debts through a processing error at the casino, he never questioned it. When I bailed out Catherine's failing boutique by having a shell company place massive orders that kept her afloat, She just thought she'd finally hit her stride. The sick part, I did it all while they continued to mock me. Every family gathering, every snide comment about my little job or my sad apartment, I absorbed while knowing I could buy and sell their entire lives with a phone call. My therapist, yes. I could afford the best therapist in Columbus now, said I was enabling them. She was right, but there was something addictive about being their invisible foundation, about knowing that their comfort, their arrogance, their entire worldview rested on my shoulders while they called me worthless. Last month, I'd finally hit $57 million in net worth. The number felt arbitrary but significant more money than Victor had touched in his entire life, built from nothing but my own mind and determination. I'd celebrated alone with a glass of water in my pretend poor studio apartment, looking at the bank statements that would make their heads explode. The plan had been to keep the secret forever, to be their silent benefactor, the ghost in their machine. But plans change. Sometimes the mask becomes too heavy to wear. Sometimes the performance has to end. Sometimes, on a cold Thanksgiving night, someone calls you useless one too many times, and you realize that the greatest revenge isn't proving them wrong, it's showing them they've been living off your success while spitting in your face. Tonight, they'd learn that the foundation they'd been standing on was named Maddie. The burden of carrying my family financially had started small, almost accidentally. It began with my mother's credit card debt, $18,000, that kept her awake at night. I'd watched her hide the bills from Victor, stuffing them in her jewelry box like guilty secrets. One day, the debt simply vanished. Must have been a banking error, she'd told Victor, relief flooding her face. She never questioned the miracle. Then came Marcus's crisis. My golden boy stepbrother had developed a gambling problem that Harvard Business School apparently didn't teach him to manage. $75,000 in debt to some very unfriendly people. I'd overheard him crying in his car one night, begging someone for more time on the phone. The next morning, an anonymous investor had bought out his debt and forgiven it. Marcus told everyone he'd negotiated his way out. Victor praised his business acumen at the next family dinner. Catherine's boutique was hemorrhaging money from day one. Her Instagram posts showed glamorous storefront photos, but I had access to the real numbers. She was 6 months from bankruptcy. Suddenly, a corporate client started placing bulk orders for executive gift baskets. $20,000 a month, like clockwork. Catherine bragged about landing a Fortune 500 account. The Fortune 500 company was me, operating through 3 shell corporations. Even Victor, the patriarch who preached self-reliance, was on my payroll without knowing it. His construction company had been struggling with modern regulations and digital adaptation. When a consulting firm offered to modernize their operations for free as a case study, he jumped at the chance. That consulting firm, another one of my LLCs. The modernization saved his company $300,000 a year. The most pathetic part was my mother's brother, Uncle Ray. Not even related to Victor, but somehow I'd become responsible for him too. His mortgage was mysteriously paid off after he'd been laid off. Bank error in my favor, he'd joked, like it was Monopoly. $15,000 of my money, and he'd never said thank you to anyone for anything. Jamie, the youngest stepbrother, needed capital for his law firm partnership buy-in. $200,000 appeared from a family trust that Victor claimed his father must have set up years ago. Victor had no idea his father's trust had been emptied by his own mismanagement a decade earlier. The money was mine, funneled through so many legal channels it looked older than Jamie himself. Every month, I spent hours managing these secret payments, maintaining the illusion that my family was successful on their own merits. The mental gymnastics were exhausting. Fake companies to run, anonymous donations to process, banking errors to orchestrate. I was essentially running a charity for people who wouldn't piss on me if I was on fire. The worst part, the more I gave, the more they took, and the less they thought of me. It was like feeding a monster that grew hungrier with every meal. Catherine started expecting those corporate orders, building her entire business model around them. Marcus took bigger risks. knowing somehow he'd always land on his feet. My mother's spending grew more reckless, subconsciously understanding that her debts would magically disappear, and through it all, they looked at me with such contempt. Poor Maddie. Pathetic Maddie. Maddie who couldn't even afford to join them for their ski trips I was secretly funding. Maddie who brought cheap wine to dinners at houses I was keeping afloat. Last Christmas, I'd watched them exchange luxury gifts while handing me practical items, a coffee maker from Walmart, discount store gift cards, a self-help book about achieving your potential. I'd smiled and thanked them while knowing I'd spent $800,000 that year keeping their lives from imploding. The reconnaissance was easy when you were invisible. They discussed their finances freely in front of me, like I was furniture. I knew every debt, every payment, every financial vulnerability. I had spreadsheets tracking their dependencies on my shadow empire. If I wanted to, I could map exactly how each domino would fall. The cruelest irony was at tax time. They'd brag about their charitable giving while having no idea they were the charity cases. Victor would lecture about parasites living off government welfare, while his entire family was living off me. The cognitive dissonance should have been crushing, but they were so convinced of their own mythology that reality couldn't penetrate. 3 months ago, I'd hired a forensic accountant to calculate exactly how much I'd spent on them over the years. The number was staggering $12.3 million. Not loans, not investments, just pure, unreciprocated giving to people who considered me worthless. "Why do you keep doing this?" my therapist had asked. "Because," I'd said, "when you grow up being told you're nothing, sometimes you need to prove you're everything, even if no one's watching." But now, standing on this porch, listening to their laughter continue without me, I realized something had shifted. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. What I needed was to stop being their secret foundation. What I needed was to let them fall. I walked back into that dining room one last time, my footsteps silent on the Persian rug I'd secretly paid to restore last year. They were still laughing, wine flowing freely, their faces flushed with alcohol and self-satisfaction. Victor was mid-story about some business triumph, gesturing with his fork like a conductor. "Oh, look who's back," Catherine announced, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Did you get lost on your way to the garage apartment?" More laughter. Marcus raised his glass in mock salute. "Maybe she was checking if her Honda finally died. I saw it wheezing in the driveway." "That car's older than Jamie," Victor added, shaking his head. "But then again, when you can't afford better." He let the sentence hang, the implication clear. I stood at my chair but didn't sit. Instead, I picked up my wine glass still full of the Bordeaux I'd brought. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through their chatter, "I was making some financial decisions." Financial decisions. Derek, my cousin, nearly snorted wine. What? Deciding between ramen brands for next week. The laughter that followed was the last straw. Not just the final insult, but the final revelation. They weren't just cruel. They were blind. Completely, utterly blind to reality. "You know what's funny," I said, and something in my tone made them pause. "Every single one of you is living off my money." Silence. Then Victor's face darkened. "Had too much wine, Maddie. Or is this another one of your fantasies, like when you thought you'd be somebody? The mortgage on this house," I continued, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand, "is guaranteed by Rowe Holdings LLC. That's me. Catherine, your boutique's biggest client, Corporate Solutions International. That's me. Marcus. Who do you think bought out your gambling debt to the Torelli family?" Marcus went white. He'd never told anyone about the Torellis. "That's enough." Victor stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're embarrassing yourself with these delusions." Delusions. I pulled out my phone, opening the banking app. Mother's credit cards, paid off every month by anonymous transfer. Jamie's partnership buy-in, funded through Embar Capital Trust. Uncle Ray's mortgage. satisfied by Madeline Investments. Should I continue? My mother's hand went to her throat. Maddie, what are you saying? I'm saying that for the past 7 years, I've been secretly funding every major expense in this family. $12.3 million, to be exact. All while you sat here, year after year, calling me useless. This is ridiculous, Catherine stammered, but her voice wavered. You work a desk job. You live in a studio apartment. You drive that piece of shit Honda by choice. I interrupted. The penthouse in that building, I own it. The entire top floor, actually. That piece of shit Honda. It sits next to a Tesla and a Porsche in my private garage that you've never seen. My net worth. I paused, looking directly at Victor. $57 million. The silence was absolute. Even the grandfather clock seemed to stop ticking. But the most pathetic part, I continued, my voice dropping to almost a whisper, is that I kept giving every insult, every useless, every time you excluded me. I still paid your bills. I was so desperate for you to love me that I became your invisible safety net. You're lying. Victor's voice was hoarse. This is some sick joke. I turned my phone toward them, showing the account balance. The number was clear, undeniable. $57,432,891. But here's the thing about being called useless one too many times, I said, setting down my glass with a soft clink. Eventually, you start to believe it. And if I'm so useless, then surely you don't need my help. My fingers moved across the phone screen with practiced precision. One by one, I canceled the automatic transfers. The corporate accounts for Catherine's boutique terminated. The mortgage guarantee withdrawn. The credit card payments stopped. Every financial lifeline I'd extended to them severed in real time as they watched. What are you doing? My mother's voice cracked. I'm giving you what you've always said you wanted, I replied. A life without useless Maddie in it. Victor lunged for my phone, but I stepped back, slipping it into my pocket. At least Victor raised us right. Unlike you, Maddie, Derek had said earlier. The words echoed in my mind as I looked at their faces, shock dissolving into panic as the implications hit them. Maddie, wait! Marcus started, his gambling debt suddenly very real again without my protection. Enjoy the rest of your dinner, I said, heading toward the door. I'm sure you'll figure it out. After all, you're the builders, right? The successful ones, the ones who did everything right. As I reached the doorway, Victor's voice boomed one last time. You can't do this, we're family. I turned, meeting his eyes with a cold smile. No, you're right, I'm useless. And useless people don't have anything to offer family, do they? The last thing I heard as I walked out was the sound of Catherine's phone buzzing, probably her bank, declining her credit card for the first time in years. The November air felt different now, cleaner, lighter, like I'd finally put down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. The calls started at 11:47 that night. First Catherine, her voice shrill with panic. My cards aren't working, all of them. The bank says the guarantee account was closed. Maddie, what did you do? I let it go to voicemail. Marcus called at 12:15, his usual arrogance replaced by raw fear. The Torellis contacted me. They said the debt was reinstated. Maddie, please, you don't understand what these people are capable of. Delete. My mother's call came at 1:30, I almost answered that one. Almost. But then I remembered her silence at dinner, how she'd looked away when Victor called me useless, how 20 years of choosing him over me had led to this moment. By morning, the family group chat I'd been excluded from for years suddenly added me back. The messages were frantic. Victor, family meeting, now. Catherine, my boutique account is frozen. The corporate orders were all canceled overnight. Jamie, the firm is saying my partnership payment bounced. This has to be a mistake. Marcus, Maddie, answer your fucking phone. I sat in my real apartment, the penthouse, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Columbus, sipping coffee from a $10,000 espresso machine while watching their world crumble in real time. The doorman called at 9, Ms. Rowe, there's a Victor Rowe here demanding to see you. He's quite agitated. Tell him I'm not available. He says he's your father. Stepfather, I corrected. And he's trespassing. Call security if he doesn't leave. 20 minutes later, I watched from my window as Victor was escorted out of the building. He looked up, somehow knowing I was watching, and I saw something I'd never seen before, fear in his eyes. The text messages became increasingly desperate. Mom, Maddie, honey, please, let's talk about this. Catherine, I could lose everything. My employees have families. Marcus, they gave me 72 hours. Please. Uncle Ray, the bank is foreclosing. Did you really pay my mortgage all those years? I responded to none of them. Instead, I had my lawyer send a formal letter to each family member, detailing exactly how much money I'd given them over the years. The letter ended with, "These gifts were made with no expectation of repayment or recognition. However, no future support will be provided." The real collapse happened faster than I'd expected. Catherine's boutique closed within a week without the fake corporate orders. She couldn't make rent. The landlord, who'd been patient only because the payments had always been reliable, evicted her immediately. Marcus disappeared for 3 days, then showed up at my office building, waiting in the lobby. Security called me. "He says he's your brother." "Stepbrother," I corrected, "and I don't want to see him." Through the security camera feed on my phone, I watched Marcus pace the lobby for 3 hours before finally leaving. His face was haggard, his Harvard confidence shattered. Victor tried a different approach. He went to Northbridge Capital and demanded to speak to my supervisor about my mental health crisis and delusional behavior. My boss called me, confused. "Your father seems to think you're having some kind of breakdown." "Stepfather," I said calmly. "And I'm fine. He's having financial difficulties and looking for someone to blame. He mentioned something about $57 million, inheritance from my biological father's family." I lied smoothly. They never approved of my mother's remarriage. Victor just found out he's not in the will. My boss laughed. "That explains it. Don't worry, we know you're solid." The family home went into pre-foreclosure after 2 missed payments. Victor had been leveraging it for years, barely making minimums, counting on the guarantee he didn't know came from me. My mother called again, crying this time. "We could lose the house. Maddie, the house where you grew up." "I grew up in a house where I was called useless," I replied, finally answering one call. "That's not a home worth saving. How can you be so cruel?" Cruel. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I subsidized your entire life while you let your husband emotionally abuse me. I paid your bills while you sat silent as they mocked me. And I'm cruel. Maddie, please. You made your choice. Mom, you chose Victor and his children over me every single day for 20 years. Now live with that choice." I hung up and blocked her number. The last I heard, they were moving into a 2-bedroom apartment in a part of Columbus they used to call depressing. Catherine was working retail. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had fled the state, presumably running from the Torellis. Jamie's law firm partnership had evaporated. Uncle Ray was living with friends, and Victor was broken. The man who'd built his identity on being the successful patriarch, the provider, the one who raised his kids right, was now exactly what he'd always accused me of being: useless. The email he sent me 2 months later was pathetic. "Maddie, I was wrong. You're not useless. Please, we need help." I read it while sitting in my office at Northbridge, where I'd just been promoted to senior director, a position I'd earned on merit, not money. I deleted the email without responding. They'd called me useless. Now they knew what useless really looked like: a life without the invisible hand that had been holding them up all along. 3 months after Thanksgiving, they ambushed me. I should have seen it coming. Desperation makes people creative in the worst ways. The emergency family meeting was disguised as a medical crisis. Aunt Patricia called from a number I didn't recognize, sobbing that my mother had suffered a heart attack. I drove to Columbus General at 90 miles per hour, my hands shaking on the wheel, cursing myself for still caring. The waiting room should have been my first clue. Too many familiar faces, not enough medical staff. When I burst through the doors, I found them all there, Victor. My mother perfectly healthy, Marcus thinner, haunted, Catherine designer clothes replaced with Target basics, Jamie, Uncle Ray, and various cousins and aunts who'd enjoyed years of holiday dinners on my invisible dime. Maddie. My mother stood, reaching for me. We need to talk. The betrayal hit harder than any insult ever had. You lied about a heart attack. We knew you wouldn't come otherwise, Victor said. He looked older, grayer, diminished. His voice had lost its boom. Please, just hear us out. 5 minutes, I said, checking my phone. Then I'm calling security. They'd prepared a presentation. Actually prepared a fucking PowerPoint. Catherine stood by a laptop, clicking through slides showing their financial devastation. The house gone. The boutique shuttered. Marcus's credit destroyed. Jamie's career derailed. We understand now, Victor said, reading from index cards with shaking hands. We were wrong. You're not useless. You're brilliant. We should have seen it. Should have appreciated you. Is that supposed to fix 20 years? I asked. No, my mother interjected. But we're family. Family. I stood up. Family doesn't call you useless. Family doesn't exclude you from vacations while spending your money. Family doesn't mock you at every gathering while you're secretly paying their bills. We'll make it right, Marcus pleaded. We'll pay you back. With what? I laughed. You're broke. All of you. Broke in ways you never thought possible because you never learned to stand on your own feet. You want to know the truth? I could have revealed myself years ago. Could have shut you all up with one bank statement, but I wanted to see if any of you would ever, just once, show me genuine kindness. Not because of money, just because I was family. Silence filled the room. But you couldn't, I continued. Even when I was paying for everything, you couldn't resist making me feel small. Do you know what that says about you? Victor's face crumbled. For the first time in 20 years, I saw him cry. Maddie, I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. I was threatened by you. Even when you were young, I could see you were smarter than my kids, more determined. I tried to break you before you could show them up. I'm a terrible person. But please, they don't deserve to suffer for my mistakes. Your mistakes! Catherine jumped up. We all did it. Dad. We all treated her like garbage. She turned to me, mascara running. I was jealous. You had this quiet confidence I never had. Even when we mocked you, you never seemed broken. It made me crazy. So you tried harder to break me? Yes, she whispered. And I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Marcus stood up, his hands in his pockets. The Torellis gave me an extension, but only because I promised them I'd get the money from you. If I don't... He didn't finish the sentence. That's your problem to solve, I said. They'll kill me. Maddie. Then you should have thought about that before gambling with money you didn't have while calling me useless. Jamie, the youngest, finally spoke. We could go public. Tell everyone how you destroyed your family, your reputation. Try it, I said coldly. I have every receipt, every bank record, every text message. The world will see how I gave you $12 million while you emotionally abused me. See how that plays out for your legal career. Victor stood up, moving toward me. Please, I'll do anything. I'll take out a full-page ad apologizing. I'll tell everyone what you've done for us. I'll get on my knees right now. And he did. Victor Rowe, the patriarch who'd tormented me for 20 years, dropped to his knees in front of his entire family. Please, he begged, help us one more time. We'll never contact you again after this. Just, please. I looked down at him. This man who'd made me feel worthless for 2 decades, now literally kneeling at my feet. The others watched, hope flickering in their eyes. They thought this grand gesture would move me. They thought humiliation would equal redemption. You know what the difference is between us. Victor, I said quietly. When I was on my knees, metaphorically speaking, begging for just basic human kindness, you laughed. You called me useless. You made sure everyone knew I was beneath you. Now you're literally on your knees, and you know what I'm not going to laugh. I'm not going to call you names. I'm just going to walk away, because that's the difference between someone with class and someone like you. I stepped around him, heading for the door. Maddie, my mother cried out. I'm your mother. Doesn't that mean anything? I turned at the door, looking back at the assembled group my tormentors reduced to beggars. It meant everything, I said. That's why it hurt so much when you chose them over me. Every single time. I stood in that doorway for what felt like an eternity, my hand on the cold metal handle. Behind me, 20 years of pain and rejection. In front of me, freedom. But my mother's broken voice stopped me one last time. Maddie, wait, just let me say one thing, not as his wife, as your mother. I didn't turn around, but I didn't leave either. I failed you, she said, her voice raw. Every time I stayed silent, every time I looked away, every time I chose peace over protecting you, I failed as a mother. I don't deserve your forgiveness. None of us do. But I need you to know that losing you is worse than losing the house, worse than losing money, worse than losing everything, because I lost you long before you walked away. I lost you the first time I didn't stand up for you. For a moment, just a moment, I felt the walls crack. 20 years of armor threatened to crumble. But then I remembered all the dinners where she'd watched me be humiliated. All the times she'd slipped me $20 like that made up for her silence. All the times she'd chosen Victor's comfort over my dignity. You're right, I said, still facing the door. You did lose me, and you can't get me back with pretty words when you're desperate. Goodbye, Mom. I walked out, leaving them in that sterile waiting room with their PowerPoint and their regrets. As the elevator doors closed, I heard Victor still calling my name, his voice echoing off the hospital walls. The next morning, I had my lawyer draft cease and desist letters. Any further contact would be considered harassment. The letters were delivered by courier to their shabby apartment, the one that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. Marcus managed to negotiate with the Torellis. Somehow I heard through the grapevine he was working 3 jobs to pay them back in installments. Catherine got a job at Macy's, folding clothes in the department she used to shop in. Jamie was disbarred after trying to forge documents to secure a loan. Uncle Ray moved to Florida to live with his ex-wife. And Victor had an actual heart attack 6 months later. Not fatal, but enough to humble whatever pride he had left. My mother sent one last letter through my lawyer, respecting the cease and desist by not contacting me directly. It contained just 4 words. I'm proud of you. I burned it without reading it twice. A year later, I was in Paris for a financial conference when I saw them on social media, someone else's post, a cousin's wedding. They looked smaller somehow, diminished, ordinary. Victor's commanding presence had withered into an old man's stoop. My mother's perfect makeup couldn't hide the sadness that had aged her 10 years in one. Catherine and Marcus flanked them like beaten soldiers, their designer everything replaced with off-the-rack basics. The cousin who posted it had added a caption, "Family is everything." I almost laughed. Family is everything, family is what you make it. And sometimes, the best family you can make is the one you choose after walking away from the one that broke you. 5 years have passed now. My net worth has doubled turned out, without the emotional drain of managing their secret finances. I could focus entirely on my own empire. I started a scholarship fund for students from abusive families, kids who need to know that being called useless doesn't make it true. Kids who need to know that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving your worth to those who hurt you, it's proving it to yourself. I kept tabs on them for a while, through public records and social media. The fancy suburb house was sold to a young family who painted over the beige with bright, happy colors. Victor's construction company folded. Catherine married a plumber, a good man, from what I heard, who knew nothing about her past pretensions. Marcus left Ohio entirely, starting over in Wyoming of all places. My mother lived quietly in her apartment, working as a receptionist at a dental office. Sometimes I wonder if I should have forgiven them, if I should have been the bigger person, shown mercy, given them one more chance. But then I remember the Thanksgiving dinner, the laughter when Victor called me useless, the decades of being treated like I was nothing while secretly being everything to them. The truth is, forgiveness isn't always the answer. Sometimes the answer is walking away. Sometimes it's choosing yourself after years of choosing people who would never choose you. Sometimes it's letting people experience the consequences of their cruelty, even if those consequences are devastating. They called me useless that night at Thanksgiving, but I wasn't useless. I was used. Used for money, used for stability, used as an emotional punching bag. The only useless thing in that house was their love, if it ever existed at all. Now, when I think about family, I think about my assistant who remembers how I take my coffee, my neighbors who water my plants when I travel, my therapist who helped me understand that being needed isn't the same as being loved. Real family doesn't make you prove your worth. Real family knows you have worth simply because you exist. Last week, I got an alert that someone had tried to access one of my old accounts, the one I'd used to pay my mother's credit cards. The IP address traced back to Columbus, to a library computer in their neighborhood. They were still trying, still hoping, still believing that somehow they could get back what they'd lost. But you can't get back what you never truly valued in the first place. You can't repair a foundation you spent 20 years destroying, and you can't call someone useless for decades and then expect them to be useful when you need them. My name is Madeline Rowe. I'm 39 years old. I'm worth over $100 million, and the most valuable thing I own isn't in my portfolio. It's the freedom I bought with 2 words, goodbye, Mom. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's success, it's happiness, it's walking away from people who never deserved you and building a life so beautiful they can't even imagine it from the outside looking in. And that's exactly what I did. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Maddie's position? Your perspectives and experiences make this community special. Until next time, remember, you're never useless, no matter what anyone says.